Tonight we shall discuss an important aspect of this month called Tammuz and much of its implications. The Hebrew month Tammuz is what most people believe first mentioned in Yechezkel, which is in chapter 8, verse 14. And there is much confusion even about the first mention, what some consider to be the first time mentioned in the Torah, of the word Tammuz, which is the Hebrew month, the equivalent of July, but sometimes the Hebrew month of Tammuz can begin at its earliest around June 10th and even extend to August, into the month of August. In other words, the Hebrew month, as you all are familiar with, the Hebrew calendar is based not on the rotation of the sun and its position in the heavens, but rather the Hebrew months depend on the ascending and descending of the moon. And it is more appropriate when we're dealing with celestial influences, because during the month of Tammuz, the crab appears in the heavens. The crab, literally a crab. If one has a telescope and he on a clear night, and if there isn't too much disturbance, meaning there isn't too much light to be observed around. That's why they're trying to make most of the observatories in deserts, because there's this tremendous conflict in observing what's going on in the heavens. We will, during the month of Tammuz, beginning with the month of Tammuz, we will notice a crab in the sky. Crab, literally a crab. This appears during the month of Tammuz. However, it is not true that the first appearance of the word Tammuz is in Yechezkel or Ezekiel, chapter 8, verse 14. It is not true, because, and I quote from the Sefer Yetzirah, the authorship of which is attributed to Avraham Avinu, Abraham the patriarch, where he says that the letter Het, when he is discussing creation of the world and how this entire universe became structured, according to Avraham Avinu, this entire structure came about by virtue of the alphabet and the letter Het in his Sefer Yetzirah, and I will quote to make the connection with the Sefer Yetzirah, which is literally making a connection with the celestial region, because we have no other way. If we and everyone, more people, I should say, are of the opinion that we are under the influence of celestial influences, and therefore, by making a connection to the celestial region, hopefully we can retain some form of control over our lives. Because according to the Zohar, and of course the Sefer Yetzirah, along with all of the commentators, that we generally operate in a robotic consciousness manner. In other words, we are not really in control. Of course, this is in direct conflict. This is in direct conflict with the with the ego, which dictates that whatever we do with our lives is generally a decision that we have made. However, according to the Zohar and according to the Sefer Yetzirah, this is the furthest from the truth. This is a complete delusion and illusion that people, or all peoples of the earth, make their own decisions. There is very little, in fact, in the way of making decisions. Very little is left to the person. If someone can please. I quote from the Sefer Yetzirah, Imlich od chet, the force, the creator, made the letter chet rule and have dominion. V'tzah bo sartam ba'olam b'Tammuz b'shana. And the letter chet, through the letter chet, the Creator established in our universe the crab in the world, meaning the crab, which is also the word for cancer, which is also the word for Sartan, and also the Hebrew month of Tammuz. Both were established by virtue of the letter Het. So we see very clearly that the word Tammuz has already been mentioned long before the prophet Ezekiel. However, we shall make use of the prophet Ezekiel in understanding, which for most of you, if you'd like to delve further into this reading of Ezekiel, which is very confusing. However, after understanding the implications and understanding the energy intelligences that deal with our month of Tammuz, it will become very clear that what Yechezkel was referring to was higher ideas than that which is mentioned. I guess this is part of the process of Tammuz, because we have never had interruptions. Let's say we've been going on here for many, many years, and this is the first time. And that would also be a normal derivative of Tammuz. All right. Let us also refer to this aspect of Tammuz, and let us connect with a reading of the Zohar, which also mentions, and of course the Zohar was after Tammuz. However, again, if we are dealing with the Zohar, which we know was already established by Daniel and Mordechai, before Ezekiel. So even the Zohar makes mention of this idea of Tammuz. And what does the Zohar say? When referring to, and I am reading from volume 7, Zion, page Samach of the Parashah Shemot. And the Zohar says that the idea that Moses was concealed for 3 months, that's within this Parashah itself, within the weekly reading of Shemot, where it says that Moses' mother, Yocheved, hid him for 3 months. And the Zohar says these 3 months, referring to the coded message of the Torah, coded, that's because in no way can we interpret the idea that I'm shortly going to present from the words of the Zohar to relate it on a superficial basis what the 3 months were about. Normally, we would translate that Moses was born in the 6th month, and therefore, since the Egyptians could tell, because they were highly intelligent people, they could tell what month a mother was pregnant with a child. They could also know whether the child was a female or a male. Where this was long before X-rays and sonograms and etc. They could tell. They could tell. And therefore, they knew that Moses would be born 3 months later, according to this commentator of this. She hid him 3 months. And consequently, since Moses was born unexpectedly in the 6th month, therefore, she had an opportunity to hide him for 3 months. And then, of course, the story, as you all know, she hid Moses in a little basket and put him on the Nile River. However, this is not the interpretation of the Zohar, because the Torah would merely be reciting a historical fact of probably no importance, because if the child was born the 9th month or the 6th month, the event of placing that child on the Nile would be forthcoming. What is the difference if she still could contain him within her household for 3 months, or the child was born at the 9th month, and before the Egyptians could come and snatch this child away, male child away, she would place the child on the Nile River. So what significance is there in relating this idea that Moses was born at the 6th month, therefore they were 3 months? However, that is the superficial explanation of what took place. But the Zohar, knowing that the entire Torah is one of concealment, says that here we learn a dramatic revelation concerning the cosmos. That what? The din akashya sharia ba'alma, that in these 3 months there is an excess, din kasher, that was uncontrollable energy. Uncontrollable energy as opposed to the other 9 months of the year. In other words, there is an excess that human beings cannot deal with, as they would normally deal with the other 9 months of the year. These 3 months, says the Zohar specifically, is Tammuz, Av, and Tevet. Tammuz, Av, and Tevet. Tammuz, therefore, is mentioned as one of these highly concentrated, intense energy intelligences that appear in this world, and therefore, we shall shortly learn, are we to be subject to this overabundance, overwhelming energy influence that we have no control over, or is there a method, is there a way that we can control it? But in any event, Rabbi Shimon continues that these are months because of their condition of din kashet. It is harsh, hard forms of energy, din. Therefore, one should avoid din kashet, as he always says, because this is the opportunity of the sitra achra, the other side, meaning the side that creates havoc and disorder, illness, misfortune, chaos, all of the things that strike most people, if not maybe all people in the world in one form or another. These 3 months are the channels, are the vehicles by which this unorthodox form of energy becomes manifest. So the word Tammuz already appeared in the Zohar as well. The word Tammuz, mentioned in the Zohar, also relates, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, to Saratan. Sartan, which means cancer. Cancer. In this month of Tammuz, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, this idea, and in fact there is no other month of the 12 signs of the zodiac, no other month in which a disorder, which is what Sartan means, and we shall shortly discuss where did this idea of Sartan come from. The Hebrew of cancer is Sartan. Where did the name come from? And we shall shortly discuss that as well. It is the only month in which this idea of disorder is mentioned. No other month is there an illness or a disease or misfortune or destruction mentioned, even in the month of Av, which is the month of Leo, in which the destruction of the temple took place, both destructions and many other chaos and chaotic conditions that struck down the Jew, like the Spanish Inquisition and many other things, when it was signed, the decree that is. Yet, the month of Av is not called the month of destruction. And yet in Tammuz, this name, Sartan, was designated by the letter Het to become manifested in our world. Immediately, we raise the question, why this month? Why this month? Secondly, why this month should there be the name of a serious illness, which, if there is any illness in the world, the most dreaded one of all medical problems, has no equal to Saratan, the cancer. No equal. Why? Because all other conditions are conditions of limiting the individual, chas v'shalom. Paralysis, whatever. Blindness, chas v'shalom. Cancer is considered the dread disease because it is assumed by those chas v'shalom who have cancer as having been invaded by an invader, by an enemy, and this enemy constantly is eating away at the structure. Imagine walking around knowing that there is an enemy, chas v'shalom, within our midst. We try to root him out. That would be a normal consequence of having some dreaded enemy within the midst. Here, it's not only from without, but it's from within. And in this month, the light force, God, saw fit to create it in this month. Why did he choose this month? Couldn't he choose another month? What about those people that are born in this month are actually, in a way, more vulnerable because their first life force, the Keter, which he said before, the Kashalei Keter, the root for those people who are born in this month, are born immediately with a connection with a connection to this dreaded disease, Saratan. Firstly, let us look at the word Saratan. And it will have the same implication that will be weaving itself right through this entire session that we have this evening. Saratan comes from two words. Two Hebrew words. Sar, which means to remove. Tan means grief, havoc, disorder. Everything of a destructive nature is included in this word, tan. It's not a Hebrew word, it's an Aramaic word. In other words, we know that the Aramaic language did not begin in Persia. It began long before. It was only the Persians who made first use of the Aramaic language. And therefore they brought Mashiach, and that is what we're hoping to do today, because it is only, says the Zohar, through the Aramaic Zohar that we will again achieve the same condition as once was accomplished in Persia, making use of the Zohar. But this word tan is Aramaic and means grief. And so what is the name of the month? Remove grief. In other words, God is not, in his infinite wisdom, all evil, chas v'shalom, as some people believe. I mean, if you just look around and you begin to raise the question, where is God? I mean, how does he permit everything that we observe around us, or those who actually participated in the Holocaust, which is only 45 years ago, and there are people around who suffered through that, who understood that there could be no greater chaos than a Holocaust, no greater disorder, and yet, in their own minds, whether they ask this question aloud or not is not important, but in their own minds, and in the minds of those who read and have heard about the Holocaust, ask that question. How come? Where is the light force? Where was God? The answer is, in that word Saratan, immediately, God is giving us a paradox. He is telling us disorder, the worst kind, which is referred to as cancer, must become manifest. However, Saratan, I am giving you information, I am giving you channels, I am giving you methods by which you can remove tan. You can remove disorder that I have placed in the world. Why did God place good and evil in the world? Well, without good and evil, there would be no free choice. That all began long before our present existence. It began with Adam Arishon. Adam had a choice to eat from the tree of life, or he could eat from the tree of knowledge, which was good and evil. He fell into that trap, and therefore we call it the fall of Adam, and he succumbed to the side of evil, to the temptation of evil, and therefore we today have to live and are now forced to live in a world of good and evil. But we must always be cognizant that we live in a world of good and evil. It is not only evil, but there is an aspect of good. Because from the word Satan, we learn immediately that in this month, while there is evil, God says remove it. Well, how do you remove it? We will discuss that this evening. How do we remove it? It's present. It has to be present. for two reasons. The temptation was there for free choice to Adam, and since he elected to eat from the tree of knowledge, that concept of good and evil became manifest, and we have to live with that. The fact that we can say we don't want to live with it isn't going to help much. It is a condition that exists, and no philosophy and no thinking can remove a fact that evil exists for the reason of free will, and therefore it is beholden upon us not to constantly ask, well, where is God? Oh, God is here, and He's here to assist us, support us, in which evil should not strike us, chas v'shalom. Now, why is there such a concentration in this month of Tammuz? Why? Again, on a not so much superficial approach to the idea of why Tammuz, why in this month is everything so concentrated, even to the extent that this disease becomes manifest in this month. For those of you who are familiar somewhat with astrology, and I'm just merely going to give you this brief overview of the idea of planets and constellations, the signs of the zodiac, and that is that there are 7 basic planets, one of which is the moon, one of which is considered the moon, and the moon and all of the 7 planets, aside from moon and sun, rule over 2 planets. They rule over 2 constellations. The only 2 planets, sun and moon, that do not rule over 2 planets, but on the contrary, act as a channel for the infusion, for the dissemination of all of its energy into one planet, is the moon and the sun. In other words, the moon rules over the month of Tammuz. Therefore, its energy as a channel, the planets have a greater capacity for infusion of energy into our universe, more so than the constellations. Constellations are a step down, are a transformation of this energy that comes from the planet moon, and since it only manifests itself by and through the channel of Tammuz, Cancer, therefore, when we ask why this month is so intense, why does the Zohar say there is so much din? It is because the full concentration of the channeling of the energy force through the moon comes down to only one constellation, only one sign of the zodiac, the moon. Therefore, we now begin to understand why the Zohar and why the Sefer Yetzirah address this month as one of havoc. But it doesn't have to be that way. But why it is because it is the recipient of one concentrated form of energy that originates with the moon. I will not go into the idea of why Av is because, well, Av is simple because, again, Av is Leo, and Leo, the sign of the zodiac, is the recipient of the total concentration from the sun. The sun does not split its energy to and into 2 signs of the zodiac, but rather the sun and its totality of all of its internal energy that it receives from the force, from God, is channeled to only one sign of the zodiac. And therefore, the Zohar will also address Av as a month of extreme, heavy indulgence of energy intelligence, concentrated energy. And therefore, it is called din kasher. If you can't handle 220, and you've only got an appliance that can handle 110, and if we ourselves should be compared to that same idea, that if we are not prepared to handle this overwhelming amount of energy as a 110 appliance, when you connect it to a 220, it burns it right out. Burns it right out. This is the way we should compare ourselves. That in these 2 months of Tammuz and Av, because there is only one channeling of the planet's force, therefore these 2 months have brought destruction. It begins with the 17th day of Tammuz, the 17th day of this month of Tammuz, indicates many serious forms of disruption. Many serious forms of disruption. Why there are serious forms of disruption? From the Zohar and from the Sefer Yetzirah, the word Tan says destruction, disorder, chaos, havoc. And therefore we should remember that if we are vulnerable, chas v'shalom, to cancer, it'll take place this month. The only month where cancer will have its origin will be only in the month of Tammuz. How do we know that? Because of the sign of the crab. God gave us that information, as King David said, Hashemayim misaprim kivodo. The heavens declare what God is doing. That is how we know what He's doing. That is how we know His timetable. He is not here for the express purpose of doing evil. He is here to channel us energy. Now, if you connect a 110 into a 220, then blame the socket. Blame the power station. Why did they infuse a 220 form of energy? That only an idiot would place their complaints in that manner. There are months where we can, on the contrary, have the added advantage of a flow of an abundance of energy. On the contrary. Therefore, Avraham Avinu gave this month, the sign of the zodiac, the name of Sartan. He says, remove it. Because this world and this universe needs that energy. God wouldn't have infused Tammuz with that energy if it wasn't necessary. He gave it because it is necessary. He gave us because it is an opportunity, 3 times during the year, an opportunity to tap that kind of energy, and then the rest of the year will be a lot easier for us. So while we are discussing Sartan, cancer, with its dreaded implication, we must also understand that at the same time, Avraham Avinu is telling us, remove the consequence of what this energy could mean for us. Provide yourself with a 220 apparatus. Provide yourself with a channel and a receptacle to receive this kind of energy by expanding from 110, if I can use that connotation, from 110 to a 220. Then this enormous energy, the benefit of this enormous energy will be to our benefit. How do we know that? Because of the 17th day of Tammuz. What was the first significant occurrence that took place in the 17th day of Tammuz? Moses, after the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, Moses brought down the tablets. He was coming down with an instrument, with a vehicle that was bringing Bila Hamavet Lanetzach. That was placed in the ark, ultimately, even the broken remnants of it. That's how powerful it was. He was bringing down the 2 tablets in its manifested form. And because this channel would be for all of humankind, a channel for the extreme, the overwhelming, whatever terminology, whatever adjectives we are going to apply to the enormous force of energy of God, was becoming manifest in these 2 tablets. When was he going to bring it down? The 17th day of Tammuz. What happened on the 17th day of Tammuz? For most people, the only significance of the 17th day of Tammuz, those who are still familiar with it, most Jews don't even know that there is such a thing as the 17th day of Tammuz. The tablets were broken. Those who are familiar with a little Torah, with a little information, no, that was the significant aspect. They completely failed to grasp the idea that it was Moses that was coming down in that day to bring us what? An intensity of force of the Etz HaChaim, the renewal of the tree of life, the energy of the tree of life, which was not diluted into the tree of knowledge, which was good and evil. That was pure, unadulterated energy, and he was bringing it down when? The 17th day of Tammuz. 17th day. And that meant, according to the Zohar and according to the Talmud, Bila Hamavet Lanetzach. Death, which is what? What is death? The soul doesn't die, but a person, after 120 years, dies. What dies? The body dies. The body and the soul are fragmented. They'll work up together. If the body and the soul could permanently remain together, it means they are one unified soul. We need a body because without the body, there would be no revelation of the soul. So we know we need both. On the 17th day, Moses was bringing down the tablets to ensure what? That the body would receive such an infusion of energy that it would be totally connected with the soul consciousness, with our soul consciousness, which never dies, and therefore there would never be death. That was the true significance of that day. And therefore, if we ask why the 17th day, why the 17th day? Why not the 14th day of the month? Again, the 17th day gives us a coded piece of information. Why God chose the 17th day. And so it's not the 17th day of significance because the temple or the Jerusalem or the wall that surrounded the temple began to be pierced by the enemy, and therefore it took on its significance. No, it was the day that a tremendous amount of positive energy was being infused in this universe. Why on that day? Because 17, again, is a code for what word in Hebrew? Tov, Tet, Vav, Bet, which means good. In other words, this day is not to create havoc, to create a destruction of the temple or the beginning of the temple. On the contrary, God was bringing to us, and that, incidentally, action never stopped. That action never stops because in spirituality we learn there is no disappearance of spiritual essence. In other words, if Moses brought down the tablets, he already established Bila Hamavet Lanetzach. Unfortunately, it was only for him himself, because as according to the Zohar, Moses never died. Forgetting about the last chapter in Deuteronomy, forgetting about it. But for the moment, we will depend on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who made the statement in the Zohar that Moses never died. You know why he never died? Because he was prepared And he was conditioned to the embracing of this energy that he himself brought down on the seventh day. Therefore, it's a good day. Therefore, it's a good day. For whom was it a good day? Moses. Unfortunately, it was not a good day for the rest of the Jews. That day, there was the golden calf. That day, there was the beginning of destruction of the temple. However, let us not forget that what brought about what? What came first? Evil or good? Therefore, the month is called Sartan. Remove the grief. Remove those aspects that prevent this enormous light from coming in. So what do we learn from the Zohar? And what do we learn from the Sefer Yetzirah? That while we are never sure of whether we are capable of handling it, we're never sure, at least let us remember that we have an opportunity only in this month, to remove the idea of cancer and whatever cancer indicates. And what does it indicate? Because cancer seems to imply all chaos and disorder. Because no other month is given a name of grief. No other month. This one. Is that the way it's supposed to be? And all those poor individuals who were born in the month of Cancer now have to suffer, chas v'shalom? No. That's not the way God set things up originally. His intent, as we learn in the Talmud Sefirot, has always been and will continue to be the sharing of goodness, the sharing of beneficence, not the distribution of evil. Evil comes from our lack of information, our lack of an ability to handle this enormous energy. And therefore, when you plug in a 110 into a 220, you don't curse out the socket, you don't curse out anybody, you just have to be aware of the fact that look at the sign, or look at that little note at that socket, only for 220. And if you decided to put a 110 in, then it is not God that should be held responsible for the burning out of the appliance. Not God that should be held responsible. Therefore, this month is an opportunity. Not only to wipe out cancer, but to wipe out all forms of imbalance. All forms of imbalance. All forms of ill balance. What is the problem that brings about the that we cannot, or the inability to handle this kind of energy? It's always a saying that doctors have. Happy people do not get cancer. Happy people do not get cancer. What does it have to do with happy people? They took a statistic and they find out that usually the people who are vulnerable to this disease are people who are unhappy. What does being happy and unhappy have to do with cancer? Why is this particular disease related to being unhappy and happiness? And therefore, again, we go back to what God wanted to give us in the way of information when we observe the crab. As some of you know, or maybe you don't, the crab has one unique signifying characteristic that does not exist nowhere else. He has one peculiar characteristic. He has a sidelong gait, which means he journeys, and if he moves or crawls or walks, he walks sideways. Walks sideways. Animals walk forward. Human beings walk forward. For him to get around, he moves sideways. That, in essence, tells the whole story. That is, in essence, what God, in to provide us with information, put the crab up there. He could still have called it cancer, but why didn't he put a fish up there? Okay, we can't say fish because Pisces. There's a month of Pisces, so he can't put the fish up there. But he could put some other animal that is not the Taurus, that is not the goat, another animal. And we'll call that animal from now on Cancer. Was it God just providing us with signs? This is what conventional astrology hasn't got the slightest idea of what it's all about. Why? Why did God put that? Again, King David says, Hashemayim Esapim Kivodo. Everything that God placed in the heavens was for our benefit to provide us with information. Anyway, briefly stated, and I don't want to dwell on this point either, when you walk sideways, if anyone stood up and walked sideways, you will notice that there is a point where you must come to a complete halt. Let's say I move my left foot to the left side. I must bring my right foot adjacent to the left foot. And at that moment, I come to a complete halt. And then I continue to move my left foot again. But I must come to a complete halt. Whereas if you walk this way, there's no halt at all. There's continual motion. What does that mean? In a word, continuity or disruption. That's all it means. And that's the secret of what God meant when he put the crab up there. Why didn't he choose something else? To inform us that when you have interruption, you have disruption, you have destruction. When you have continuity, constant motion, continuity, and I will briefly examine both those two words, you have happiness, you have completeness, and everything that surrounds continuity. Now, what is continuity? Continuity means something never comes to an end. It's perpetual motion. Like when you walk forward, perpetual motion. Only when you walk sideways, like the crab, is there discontinuity. There's disruption. Those two words already are telling us that when you have continuity, meaning you are not feeling suddenly a lack. You don't suddenly feel a vacuum. It's continuous motion. When you come to a stop, for whatever reason, let's assume there's a child with a father or a mother. There's a relationship, an ongoing relationship. If chas v'shalom, that father or mother dies, there's a disruption. There is discontinuity. What does that bring about? Sadness, usually. Sadness. A feeling of unfulfillment because the parent could provide certain information. That parent could provide certain security. And now that is gone. So what happens? Doubts. A disruption in the procedure of yesterday to tomorrow. There's a halt. A halt. Why could people be susceptible the cancer, and to its origin, is when in this month, if they should suffer in whatever form, a halt in their continual motion of life, they are now vulnerable. They are now vulnerable to this infusion of this enormous light. They are now open to disruption, of which Tammuz and the light that is infused in this universe is capable of creating disruption. If I connect a 110 into a 220, what happens with the appliance? It's brought to a halt. At a certain point, it gets the energy, but you know that it gets burnt out very quickly and is brought to a complete halt. No further benefit from that. The same thing comes with an individual. If, for whatever reason, we say the desire to receive for self alone, if, unlike even Rabbi Shimon, where the holiday of his death is celebrated as a holiday, yet he died. And we even read in the Zohar, the children, the Balazar, his other students, bemoan the fact that Rabbi Shimon was leaving. They were not happy. The Balazar was not happy. However, when that day came, where Rabbi Shimon told the students, I'm leaving, while they knew there would be a lack in the world, they themselves realized that the world goes on. The world will go on, especially Rabbi Shimon. His teachings will continue. They did not experience, despite the fact that they felt there would be a lack in the world, but insofar as they were concerned, they did not consider his leaving this world as something that brought about a lack within themselves. The world would not have access to this information directly. We would not have to struggle over his teachings. But he did not die. There was continuity of all of his teachings. The only problem was the difficulties that we now would have to experience, because when we have a question of the Zohar, we ask Rabbi Shimon, and there he is, and he provides us with an answer. Now, I would have to struggle myself without his seeming support. But that's an illusion. We call that an illusion. Disruption, or what we consider to be lack, is an illusion. We live in this world of good and evil, and therefore disruption, evil, unfulfillment has to make its presence felt. But it does not mean that I have to be overwhelmed by that disruption, but on the contrary. Let me understand that this month, whenever it occurred, this disruption was an illusion, and even during this month, where things seem to go wrong because there's an overabundance of energy, and therefore Rabbi Shimon indicates not to begin things anew, to avoid new ideas, to avoid new ventures, etc., etc. However, that is not indicative that this is a bad month. On the contrary, it's a very powerful month. But there is the dangers. There is an experience that we must go through, and that would be an experience of maybe doubt, a feeling of disruption, But why would we have that feeling of disruption? Only because there is, on the contrary, an overabundance of energy. When a person dies, when a parent dies, you feel the lack. Why are we told that this is the day of celebration, not a day of mourning? We mourn, but each year it is not called a day of mourning. Each year it is called Yom Hilula. It's a time and a day of celebration. Why? Because that same parent, like Rabbi Shimon, when they return on their death anniversary, they are in a better position to assist us than when they were alive, which I won't go into how, why, and what, but that's why we celebrate Yom Hilula. That's why hundreds of thousands of people make their way to Rabbi Shimon on the death anniversary. Why? Because that is the day that Rabbi Shimon, as much as he could have contributed to the welfare and benefit of mankind, on that day, because he no longer has the limitation of body, which Rabbi Shimon practically did not have anyway, even that little limitation called the body, and that is the limitation. Because when someone leaves, a parent, and if we psyched ourselves in, let's say it's a false psyching in, that the parent is here, didn't disappear. Let's say we want to fool ourselves. What would be the result of fooling ourselves? We would be happy. Is that something wrong? I mean, can't we sometimes fool ourselves into believing that things are good? Or must we assume that things are bad? Let's say it's even an illusion, because it's not. It's not. The soul does not disappear. The soul does not die. Soul consciousness is a continuous channel for those who are left behind to tap that energy constantly. There is continuity. So even in the death of a loved one, with the study of Tammuz, we would then understand that disruption should not take place. There is no disruption. Disruption is an illusion. That would be information by which we can remove the limitations. Because disruption is what we are told, remove. Saratan. Remove that disruption. Remove that halting of your life. As difficult as it might be, but in its removal, then you have continuity. And then you have Tov. You have the benefit of life that Moshe originally intended for this month. The same will hold true when Avraham Avinu gives us this information of Tammuz. A word, Tammuz. Again, there is much corruption that surrounds this word. Tammuz, what does it mean? Is it some name? You have to call a month by its name. And so we want to say, when were you born? You'll say, I was born in Tammuz. If he didn't have a name, we wouldn't know when he was born. And we know in Kabbalistic teachings, that is never a reason why a particular word is chosen for a particular name. Never. Tammuz gives us the answers of why, and we still didn't come to that answer, why was the moon chosen to provide such an intensified form of energy in this particular month and give this kind of connotation and dread disease called Satan? Why now? Couldn't he have chosen another month to provide us with all that we have just said, all that has just been taught to us by Rabbi Shimon? Why this month? The fact that the temple or the Temple Mount was pierced is never a reason for mourning. We know from a Kabbalistic principle, a physical occurrence never will provide us with a meaning and a reason of why things are happening. Never. In other words, the destruction or beginning of the destruction of the temple in Tammuz was a result of, and not a cause of mourning in this particular month. We will continue with Tammuz and other aspects of how we can prevent this calamity after a short break.